time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely. Well, for a start, the only time that I've come back to the UK is...
The Crown briefing was only moments away. Senior officials were seated, cameras were being checked, and Prince William was preparing to deliver one of the most closely guarded royal announcements of the year. Then, he looked toward the backstage corridor and froze. Standing behind a security barrier was a man closely connected to Prince Harry, someone William believed had no legitimate reason to be there. Within seconds, the future king made a decision that stunned the entire room. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William had reviewed every name on the guest list himself, because the Crown briefing, a formal royal meeting used to announce major decisions and responsibilities, would reveal changes to public duties, charity leadership, and the monarchy's future strategy. Nothing discussed inside that chamber was meant to escape before he spoke that morning without warning. Yet Elliot Fraser, Harry's longtime friend, stood beside a communications assistant in a restricted corridor reserved for senior palace staff. The prince stopped so suddenly that his private secretary nearly walked into him. He raised one hand, kept his voice low, and said, "No one goes on stage. Shut it down now." The order moved through the room in seconds. Microphones remained silent. Officials stayed seated. Behind the closed doors, confusion spread. But William felt something colder than embarrassment. He felt betrayed. Elliot was not listed as a guest, contractor, advisor, or accredited journalist. That fact mattered, because 2 security checkpoints separated the public entrance from the backstage area. Someone had either helped him pass through or deliberately placed his name where it did not belong. When officers approached, Elliot did not panic. He reached into his jacket and produced a temporary palace credential carrying an approval mark from William's own communications team. Catherine watched her husband return with his prepared remarks still clenched in one hand. She saw the tension in his jaw and understood immediately that this was not a delayed event or a technical failure. The princess moved closer and asked whether Harry knew. William did not answer. His silence told her that the question had already cut too deeply. Elliot finally spoke through a recorded security interview, insisting he had come with a message connected to Harry and that someone inside the palace had instructed him to arrive before the speech. William heard those words and realized the breach was no accident. The briefing had been stopped, but the real crisis was only beginning, because the stranger backstage was not merely Harry's friend. He was carrying the weight of an unfinished war between 2 brothers. To the officials waiting inside the briefing room, the cancellation looked like a security decision. To William, it felt like history repeating itself. Harry was not physically present, yet his shadow had entered the palace before the prince could utter a single word. Every disagreement, every private conversation that had become public, and every promise that had collapsed between the brothers suddenly returned through one unexpected face standing behind a curtain. William had spent months rebuilding trust inside the royal household after leaks, private disputes, and bitter stories had weakened confidence around him. The household meant the small network of senior staff responsible for supporting the working members of the monarchy. He had tried to restore order carefully, because another breach would not only embarrass him, it would suggest that the future king could not control his own team. Harry still mattered to him more than he wanted anyone to see. The Duke lived far from the center of royal duty, but distance had never erased the bond between them. William could speak about responsibility in public with a steady voice, yet in private, the wound remained raw. Catherine understood that the anger on her husband's face was not only about security. It was the pain of believing his brother might have sent someone else, instead of calling him directly. William entered a small side room, placed his prepared speech on the table, and stared at the first page without reading a word. Catherine followed him alone and closed the door. "Was he sent by Harry?" she asked. The prince looked down, then away. He feared the cancellation would make him appear unstable or suspicious. But continuing after such a breach would have exposed the Crown to far greater humiliation. Elliot Fraser had known Harry for years, and had supported him through several difficult changes. He held no royal role, yet the Duke trusted him with private concerns. When a security officer asked why he had entered the restricted area, Elliot replied, "I was told the prince needed to hear something before he spoke." He refused to say which prince he meant. Amelia Grant turned pale when officers showed her the temporary pass. As William's deputy communications director, she had helped organize the briefing from the beginning. The initials were hers. So was the approval signature. Even the small private mark she used on internal papers had been copied perfectly. William now faced two terrible possibilities. Someone had forged access to the briefing, or someone inside his trusted circle was lying to him. As security began tracing the pass, one forgotten meeting returned to the center of the crisis, a private encounter 3 weeks earlier that had given Elliot both a motive and a warning. The Backstage breach did not begin on the morning of the Crown briefing. Its true beginning came 3 weeks earlier, inside a quiet London townhouse, where Harry's friend met someone from William's household without royal protection, official minutes, or palace approval. What passed between them lasted less than 20 minutes. Yet one sentence spoken at that meeting created the fear, urgency, and mistrust that would eventually bring the briefing to a complete halt. Elliot Fraser had agreed to meet Amelia Grant because she had once helped coordinate charitable work linked to both brothers. The planned restructuring meant several shared projects would be reorganized, closed, or placed permanently under William's authority. A royal household was the official team supporting a senior member of the family, and dividing one program between two such offices had become difficult, costly, and politically sensitive. Amelia tried to describe the changes as routine. She told Elliot that the palace was simplifying leadership and removing confusion over responsibility. Then she made one mistake. She mentioned that William would announce the permanent closure of a program Harry had helped establish during his working royal years. Elliot went still. To palace officials, the change was administrative. To him, it sounded like the final removal of Harry's name from something that had once defined his public service. Amelia stood up when she realized she had revealed too much. He remained seated and asked, "Does Harry know his name is being removed?" She paused at the door, but she gave no answer. Harry heard the details later, through a private telephone call from Elliot. The Duke did not shout. He did not order his friend to interfere. Instead, he asked one question that exposed how deeply the news had wounded him. "Would my brother have told me after everyone else?" Elliot tried to reassure him, but Harry kept returning to the same fear that silence had become another way of erasing him. 2 days before the briefing, Elliot received an anonymous envelope at his office. Inside was the temporary palace credential and a handwritten instruction telling him to arrive 20 minutes before William's speech. The note also warned that a hostile statement about Harry had been added without the prince's full knowledge. Harry paced alone during another recorded call with his friend. He told Elliot not to embarrass William and not to create a public scene. Yet he also said the future king deserved to know if someone was using his authority to deepen the division between them. Elliot therefore went backstage for more than Harry's legacy. He believed someone inside the palace was pushing both brothers toward a public collision. The moment William finally entered the waiting room, the security breach became something far more dangerous, a face-to-face reckoning over loyalty, secrecy, and the brother who was not there. The room fell silent when William entered. Elliot was seated beneath the watch of 2 security officers, but the prince ordered them to step outside. For the first time that morning, there were no cameras, no advisors, and no prepared words. Only 2 men stood between a cancelled royal announcement and a family wound that had never truly closed. William remained near the door and asked the question that could change everything. "Did my brother send you?" Elliot looked up, but did not answer at once. William had chosen to confront him personally because Harry's connection made the breach too dangerous to treat as an ordinary security matter. The heir to the throne, the person next in line to become monarch, was not speaking only as a future king. He was also speaking as an older brother, carrying years of anger, suspicion, and disappointment. Catherine waited in an adjoining office, knowing exactly what was at stake. She understood that one careless accusation could deepen the family divide, while one hidden truth could expose a threat inside William's own circle. The princess trusted her husband's judgment, but she also knew how quickly pain could turn into certainty when Harry was involved. William placed the temporary pass on the table and demanded to know where it came from. Elliot said an anonymous envelope had arrived at his office with the credential inside and a warning that could not be ignored. The prince accused him of using a damaged family relationship to interfere in royal business. Elliot did not retreat. He told William that the palace had already dragged that relationship into the announcement. Then the future king asked again whether Harry had ordered him to come. "He told me not to cause a scene," Elliot replied. "He did not know I had a pass." William had expected a confession that would justify his anger. Instead, the answer unsettled him. For the first time, he had to consider that Harry might not be behind the breach at all. His brother might be another target. Elliot then explained through the recorded security interview that an extra paragraph had been added to the briefing draft. It blamed the charity changes on continued instability caused by former working members. William immediately denied approving those words. The proof changed everything. Elliot produced a photograph sent by the anonymous source, and the prince read the paragraph twice. He recognized the layout, spacing, and internal format used by his own communications office. William looked up and asked, "Who benefits from making Harry believe I wrote this?" The briefing had been cancelled because he feared Harry's influence, but the true threat now appeared much closer. Someone inside the palace had turned a family wound into a weapon, and William was about to discover whose hand was controlling it. Royal authority is often measured by crowns, ceremonies, and public titles. Yet inside the palace, real power can rest in something far less visible: the ability to choose the words placed before a future king. William had approved the broad purpose of the crown briefing, but someone had quietly reshaped its emotional meaning. The altered paragraph was designed not merely to announce change, it was designed to blame Harry and ensure William carried the consequences. William ordered his team to trace every change made to the speech. The briefing draft had moved through royal communications, legal review, charitable administration, and the office responsible for family coordination. A briefing folder was the final collection of approved remarks and supporting notes placed before a senior royal. The prince held final authority, but trusted staff often refined the language before that folder reached him. The editing record revealed one name: Sir Malcolm Reed, the veteran strategist guiding the monarchy through its institutional transition, had used his access code to insert the hostile paragraph. That transition meant the planned shift of duties, influence, and public responsibilities as the royal family prepared for its next chapter. Malcolm had served the crown for decades. He knew exactly how a single sentence could change the meaning of an entire announcement. Charles received the altered page in his private study. The king removed his glasses, placed them beside the document, and said nothing. His equerry watched the monarch read the paragraph twice and understood that the discovery had struck deeper than professional disappointment. Charles had trusted Malcolm during illness, family division, and public pressure. Accepting this betrayal meant accepting that his own judgment had failed both sons. William confronted the advisor in a quiet office, away from the rest of the staff. The prince pushed the draft across the desk and asked, "When did my brother become a problem you were authorized to solve?" Malcolm did not deny approving the words. Through the recorded internal interview, He argued that the paragraph reflected an institutional reality the family was too emotionally involved to express. He believed Harry's continued connection to royal projects created confusion and risk. William answered that no advisor had the right to turn private pain into official policy. The strategist then admitted something worse. Malcolm had arranged Elliot's access through an assistant, hoping the security incident would justify excluding everyone connected to Harry from future royal events. He had used William's authority, Harry's anger, and Elliot's loyalty to create the crisis he wanted. William's fury hardened into resolve. Charles did not dismiss Malcolm immediately. Instead, the king summoned both men to a private meeting, forcing father and son to decide whether service to the institution could ever excuse betrayal within the family. The altered speech had exposed the architect of the crisis, but the damage was already escaping the palace corridors, and everyone involved was about to feel the cost. By midday, the empty platform had become more powerful than any speech William might have delivered. Journalists had seen officials leave without explanation. Charity representatives had been escorted from the chamber. Staff members whispered about a backstage intruder, and the absence of an official statement created a vacuum that suspicion quickly filled. Inside the palace, however, the deepest consequence was not public embarrassment. It was the realization that trust had collapsed on every side. The palace announced that the crown briefing had been postponed because of an internal security concern. A crown briefing was a formal royal announcement used to explain major changes in duties, charities, or public responsibilities. The careful statement prevented panic, but it did not stop questions. Charity leaders feared their programs might disappear, while staff wondered whether private information had already escaped beyond the palace walls. Catherine found William alone in the abandoned chamber. The princess told him that canceling the event had protected the monarchy from a deeper humiliation. He did not look convinced. The prince admitted that the empty stage might now confirm every accusation that the royal family could no longer speak without conflict, suspicion, or betrayal. Harry reacted with anger when he learned that Elliot had been discovered backstage. The Duke believed his friend had ignored a clear warning and crossed a line that could not be defended. He ended their first telephone call before Elliot could fully explain. Minutes later, Harry received a recorded voice message from his friend. Elliot described the altered paragraph, the anonymous pass, and the possibility that William had never approved the attack. The Duke sat down, covered his face with one hand, and played the message again. His anger weakened. In its place came a darker thought. Both brothers might have been pushed toward the same trap. The evidence against Malcolm grew harder to deny. His office computer contained two versions of the briefing, one clean draft for William's review, and another carrying the divisive language for the final folder. Security records also showed that the strategist had ordered an assistant to add Elliot to a temporary access list, then remove the name before the event began. Charles responded without hesitation. The king suspended Malcolm from all royal duties pending a full internal review, meaning a formal investigation into his actions and authority. Amelia was cleared of issuing the pass, but she remained devastated that her earlier conversation had helped set the crisis in motion. William stood alone when his private phone rang. He saw Harry's name on the screen and understood that the investigation could punish wrongdoing, but it could not decide what came next. That verdict belonged only to the brothers themselves. There were no private secretaries listening, no lawyers arranging language, and no palace officials preparing a record. When William answered Harry's call, the two brothers were finally alone with the consequences of everything that had happened. Neither began with an apology. Neither mentioned the crown briefing immediately. For several seconds, they heard only each other's breathing and uncomfortable silence, filled with years of accusations, grief, pride, and memories neither distance nor duty had managed to erase. William had resisted direct contact because earlier conversations had ended in frustration or later appeared through competing public accounts. Harry had stayed away for a different reason. The Duke believed any intervention would be treated as a challenge to palace authority, meaning the formal power used to make and enforce royal decisions. Both brothers had convinced themselves that silence was safer. Now silence had nearly allowed someone else to speak for them. Harry finally broke it. "Elliot should not have entered that corridor," he said. William answered without raising his voice. He should never have been given the pass. The distinction changed everything. The prince was not excusing the breach, but he was no longer blaming his brother for creating it. Harry heard that shift immediately and admitted that the planned closure of the charity program had cut deeper than he expected. He felt as though years of work, loyalty, and public service were being erased with one announcement. William did not defend the palace. Instead, he confessed that seeing Elliot backstage had made him assume the worst before hearing a single explanation. The future king knew what that admission revealed. Trust between them had become so weak that one unexpected face was enough to revive every old suspicion. The prince picked up the cancelled speech while Harry remained on the line. He found the altered paragraph, tore it from the draft, and told his brother that those words had never represented his decision. The hostile reference would be removed from every future version. Harry then made his position clear through that private telephone conversation. He did not expect his former royal role to return, and he was not asking to control the program from a distance. The Duke wanted only one thing: acknowledgement that his contribution could be concluded without being condemned. William agreed to preserve the program's original history and record Harry's part in creating it. Neither brother offered a dramatic reunion. No promises were made about immediate forgiveness. "Thank you for telling me yourself," Harry said quietly. "It should have happened sooner," William replied. The call did not heal every wound, but it gave the prince the clarity he needed. The brothers had finally spoken without anyone standing between them. And when William returned to the platform, the world would see the difference one private conversation had made. Before the palace could fully explain the cancellation, the image had already traveled across Britain. An illuminated royal platform, rows of prepared chairs, and no prince standing behind the lectern. The missing speech became the story. Commentators debated security, family loyalty, and whether Harry's name had once again divided the monarchy. Yet when the public learned that William had stopped the event rather than deliver words he had not approved, the mood began to change. News organizations first treated the incident as an extraordinary security failure involving someone connected to Harry. The palace then confirmed that an unauthorized guest had entered a restricted area using an improperly issued credential. A restricted area meant a protected section open only to approved staff, officials, and invited royal guests. That confirmation mattered because it proved the cancellation had not been caused by nerves, confusion, or a simple change of schedule. The following morning, the fictional London Chronicle placed the abandoned lectern across its front page, beneath the headline, "The Speech That Never Happened." A smaller caption asked whether William had stopped a trap from being carried out in his name. The question changed the public debate. Attention shifted from the absent speech to the person who had altered it. Eleanor Marsh addressed the controversy during an evening broadcast outside Buckingham Palace. The royal correspondent said, "The prince did not cancel because he feared the truth. He cancelled because he discovered the words were not truly his." Her statement spread quickly because it gave the event a different meaning. William no longer appeared weak. He appeared unwilling to repeat another person's attack. Catherine watched the coverage beside her husband at home. The princess heard one commentator praise his restraint, but William did not smile. He told her the briefing should never have reached that point. She understood why the praise brought him no comfort. His correct decision had come only after trust inside the palace had already failed. A small crowd gathered near the palace gates, and one handwritten sign read, "Brothers before briefings." That message became the most widely shared image of the public response. Harry issued no public attack, while Elliot gave no interview and made no media appearance. Their silence stopped the crisis from becoming another bitter exchange. Charles authorized a formal review of speech approvals, temporary credentials, and advisors' power to alter language about royal relatives. The king also confirmed Malcolm's removal from strategic duties. A clean draft, meaning a version free from unauthorized changes, would be approved personally by William before the rescheduled event. The empty stage had exposed the monarchy's internal fracture. Now the prince's return would decide whether that fracture became another scandal or the beginning of a more honest royal order. 7 days after the cancellation, William entered the same chamber and stood before the same lectern. The chairs were filled again, but the atmosphere had changed. Every sentence had been reviewed in his presence. Every credential had been checked. No advisor controlled the meaning from behind a closed door. This time, the future king was not simply announcing changes to royal work. He was reclaiming his voice from those who had tried to turn family pain into institutional strategy. William placed the prepared pages before him and looked across the chamber. The rescheduled crown briefing, a formal royal announcement explaining major changes in duties and public work, still included the planned restructuring of several charities. Yet every line blaming Harry or other former working royals for instability had been removed. The prince had approved the final version personally, because he would never again allow another person to hide cruelty behind his authority. The crown is strengthened by clarity, but never by language designed to divide a family, William said before beginning. The words were not an apology, and they were not an invitation to pretend the past had disappeared. They were a boundary. Royal duty could require distance, discipline, and painful decisions, but it could not justify manipulation. Catherine sat in the front row and watched the tension leave her husband's shoulders. The princess understood that he was no longer reacting to Elliot's appearance backstage. He had decided what kind of leader he intended to become. Canceling the first briefing had not been weakness, panic, or surrender. It had been judgment, the choice to stop, before false words became permanent history. Harry did not return to royal duty, and the brothers did not claim that every disagreement had been healed. The Duke's earlier work, however, remained in the official record, meaning the permanent history kept by the royal household. His contribution could now be acknowledged without restoring his former position or using his name as a weapon. Elliot accepted responsibility through a recorded security statement for entering the restricted corridor. Harry's friend received a permanent ban from unauthorized royal areas, but the warning he carried had exposed a deeper betrayal. Without him, Malcolm's hidden plan might never have been discovered. Charles removed the advisor from palace service and imposed strict limits on anyone altering speeches involving family relationships without direct royal approval. The king had learned that institutional loyalty meant nothing when it depended on deception. The crown briefing ended without a dramatic reunion or a false promise of perfect harmony. It delivered something stronger, a clear line between honest disagreement and deliberate betrayal. William protected the monarchy, acknowledged Harry's place in its history, and refused to let another man speak through him. The briefing William cancelled became the moment he discovered the trap. The briefing he finally delivered became the moment he proved that leadership meant knowing when to stop, whom to confront, and which wounds must never again be used as weapons. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.